Welcome to The World Unspun. Before we get into today's episode, we want to hear from you. Since we launched this show last year, we've sought to bring the pages of our print magazine to life and reach more people in more ways with our unique form of journalism. With thousands of listeners in dozens of countries, we want to make this show the best it can be. That's where you come in. What episodes did you enjoy the most? Is there anything you didn't like? What should we cover next, and how? Check our show notes for the link to this short survey, and thanks again so much for listening. Now, onto the long read, read by our co-owner, Kiran Gupta. A warning that there is some strong language in this episode.
Where is the left? Radical organizing was once backed up by a network of physical spaces. How can we rebuild them to support the movements we need now? By Rosie Hampton. If you needed somewhere to meet for left-wing political organizing in 1980s Glasgow, you wouldn't have been short of options. Walking down Miller Street in the city centre, you could brave the 1,000 stairs up to the meeting rooms of the Glasgow Women's Centre, where you could get advice about welfare or housing benefits. Or you could visit one of the city's 6 unemployed workers' centres, where you'd find trade union resources, even if you weren't working. If you had some disposable income, you could purchase new reading material from the Women's Centre bookstall, or take a short walk over to the Glasgow Gay Centre. You might meet people from across all these venues of an evening, perhaps at a fundraiser for Glasgow's Lesbian Line, held at the Communist Party's Star Club as you headed towards the city's East End. Put simply, the left had space. There were spaces to meet and argue, spaces to organise and plan, and spaces to socialise too. This was true in Glasgow, but also across much of Scotland, Britain, and the wider world. Yet now, the left is looking at a very different and less vibrant landscape. The Women's Centre in Glasgow closed in the early 1990s. At their high point, there were 250 unemployed worker centres across Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, there are just 18 that are active. There were over 100 radical bookshops in Britain by 1980, a peak that has yet to be returned to. The loss of these spaces is significant. They were an important way to build and defend the left. Having different groups sharing the same space provided opportunities for people to learn how to organize together. If there were challenges, they could be worked out in person. The chance to negotiate this alongside more everyday concerns, like how to furnish the space, built trust for when crucial moments arose for different campaigns. George, the coordinator of the Unemployed Worker Centre in Drumchapel, Glasgow, told me that he'd been adamant that the centre was not to have a pool table in case it made the space seem too much like a boys' club for women and families. He also stressed to me that, during the Thatcher years, we were under attack, so it wasn't about advancing workers' rights really. In the 80s, it was more about defending. This was felt not just within the labour movement, but elsewhere too. The spaces referenced above were attached to a range of political movements active in 1980s Scotland. Glasgow Women's Centre was set up by Women's Liberation Movement WLM activists, who hoped that a central drop-in style location might make it easier for new recruits to get involved. Unemployed worker centres in Scotland were established with the support of the Scottish Trades Union Congress, STUC, in 1981. The centres were partly introduced to support the growing numbers of people who were out of work, but they were also a crucial way to keep people who weren't working connected with the networks and solidarity of the trade union movement. Similarly, the Scottish Minorities Group, later the Scottish Homosexual Rights Group, which ran the Glasgow Gay Centre, were clear that having a physical space was essential to building connections and solidarity. Ever since the Glasgow branch has been in existence, the main ambition of the members has been to acquire premises, the group's 1977 annual report noted. For decades, the existence of these sorts of spaces was a given of life on the left. Luke was involved in a range of different spaces and groups. She would often compare them to one another, thinking through what was useful or not about each of them. During her time on the Unemployed Worker Centre Committee, she recalls an awful lot of being in meetings to organise the next demonstration, then beyond the demonstration. There was a sense that you could bring different tactics from one space or movement from another, and being across a variety of political spaces that enabled her to do that. Why it matters. There are, of course, still moments of solidarity between different groups on picket lines, at demos, and during marches. But there is something worth mourning about the absence of permanent, dedicated premises for organizing. There was absolutely conflict and disagreement. No history of left-wing organizing is complete without those stories. But the chance to navigate this in person, in spaces built collectively, meant generating new ideas and new ways of doing things. The disappearance of the spaces has made it harder for these diverse and even sometimes contradictory ways in which people are engaged in left-wing politics and day-to-day organizing to flourish. And if these moments are harder to see, it's increasingly easy to pretend they don't exist at all. Take Ash Sarkar's recent book, Minority Rule. Sarkar is a journalist and contributing editor at Novara Media, a broad left-wing media organization. Beginning as a community radio show in 2011, Sarkar was involved in Novara from the start, and her own history of politicization is reflected in the book, from protesting the introduction of university tuition fees in England and Wales to the election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party in 2015. This shapes the overall political argument of the book, which is that yes, there is a very real minority that shapes our political and social lives, but it is not minorities, migrants or transgender people, for example, who make up that group. Rather, it is political and media elites that dictate the terms and topics of political discourse. This acts as a distraction from the disproportionate and unjust amount of wealth and power they hold at the expense of working-class people and their communities. So far, so good, if not especially original. But Minority Rule begins to unravel rather quickly as soon as the first chapter, when it takes aim at the left for falling for these distraction tactics. Sarkar claims that the left unwittingly forged the political weapons being used against it by our political opponents. According to this account, the left is divided within itself, preoccupied with questions of identity, and consumed by a version of identity politics that focuses more on who has it hardest and who from that group can shout the loudest, claiming that the left has created a cult of subjectivity, obsessed with individual victimhood rather than collective material condition. By ignoring real material struggles, the left is therefore losing the broader political argument and the fight on the ground. Yet I wonder where Sarkar has encountered the left that informed such an analysis. The promotional tour she embarked on for the book involved extensive repetition of some of her most exasperating anecdotes, such as a debate over the class implications of saying your favorite kitchen utensil is a salad spinner. Most of these are taken from the book's first chapter, which begins with a narration of Sarkar's experience of chairing a panel discussion at the World Transformed TWT, an annual festival of left-wing politics in 2023. At the event in question, Sarkar tells us that the discussion was derailed by attendees taking offense at Roger Hallam, environmental activist and co-founder of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, calling the audience a bunch of fucking cunts. She laments that the left, defined in this paragraph as the upset audience, could not get past Hallam's crude language and thus could not get stuck into what they were there to do. The chapter continues with a look at some X, formerly Twitter posts, and memes of questionable importance, such as an anonymous tweet that references Anne Frank having a degree of white privilege. Sarkar presents the left through these vignettes as weak, and ultimately lacking in solidarity, critical analysis, and grit. This analysis avoids the harder questions of what left-wing organizing is actually like in our everyday political lives. It doesn't engage with branch meetings, picket lines, occupations, blockades, fundraisers, where much more robust and hopeful organizing is taking place. While I've often greatly enjoyed TWT and I'm yet to divest from X, neither of them are the sum of the left. This is a version of the left that's more commonly found among right-wing and centrist commentators. If one Guardian article about someone using the word traumatic to describe a yoga class led by white women sends you into a spiral or a book deal, then it is only you that needs to grow a backbone. I am not suggesting that we should feel complacent. In fact, the challenges we do face in left-wing organizing across diverse sets of movements are precisely why accounts like Minority Rule are so frustrating. If the left is everyone and no one at once, then it's very easy to project the most irritating political experiences onto them. Many of us have had challenging experiences and needed to let off steam about a meeting gone awry or an intervention we thought was nonsense. But is it useful to craft an analysis based on these moments alone? Does that lead us to the tactics and strategy we need to better organize? Defaulting to a series of anecdotes about online posting rather than to embodied political organizing is deeply unserious. It should be cause for concern when someone is using social media, rather than regular in-person encounters, to analyze and offer critiques of left-wing organizing. The value of history. As we're searching for actual tools to organize, there's a lot we can pull from the histories of left-wing spaces to help us, especially when it comes to navigating the different needs of groups in solidarity with one another. On the surface, Glasgow Women's Centre, like its counterparts across the WLM in Britain, was a women-only space. This was an important tenet of women's liberation. Not everyone would feel comfortable discussing how they were oppressed by patriarchy under the gaze of men. Especially as women's centres were home to the early iterations of rape crisis collectives or women's aid, and women would seek them out for support and organisation against gender-based violence. But by virtue of being a collective space, the women's centre's audience was bigger. The Scottish Abortion Campaign, SAC, often held campaign meetings there. The 1967 Abortion Act legalised terminations conducted by a doctor between the 1st and 24th week of pregnancy in Britain. But women in Scotland continued to face pronounced barriers to accessing abortion and reproductive health care, prompting the emergence of a Scottish-specific campaign. It was important for us to have men involved, says Carol, who joined the campaign early on, since pregnancy was their responsibility too. Organisers weren't sure whether they would be able to continue to use the Women's Centre for their campaign meetings. The Lesbian Line, a telephone service that offered support services to lesbian women in Glasgow, operated out of the centre, and its anonymity was crucial. For them, it was so important for them to have a women-only space. It was very, very difficult for lesbians at that time. The very thought that men were going to be in the Women's Centre was very difficult indeed, Carol says. After a lot of discussion, the Lesbian Line organisers accepted and agreed with why we had men behind us in the campaign, and allowed their presence in the centre. It was a huge thing that they did that for us, she recalls. That the women involved in both campaigns were able to negotiate the use of the space is testament to the value of women's centres in building solidarity across diverse groups. These encounters built trust and mutual respect, which was integral to sustaining the two campaigns. Reclaiming space, reclaim the city. We can also find hope and valuable lessons by looking at how left-wing spaces have operated internationally. In Cape Town, South Africa, the fight for space to organise is inseparable from the fight for land and housing. Karen Hendricks is one of the chapter leaders of the grassroots Reclaim the City movement, which organises for safe and affordable housing. The group formed in late 2016, and Karen became involved around the case of a mass eviction where a block of flats, a home for decades for many families, was sold to a private developer. Tenants refused to be relocated from their inner-city community to the peripheries and fought back. The location of their homes was integral to their struggle. They refused to be moved from where their jobs and lives were. Reclaim the City's fight is not just one for housing, but also for space. Its tagline, "Where people live matters." Reclaim the City also oversees 3 occupied buildings across Cape Town, which are collectively home to thousands of people, many of whom had been evicted from their previous homes with nowhere to go, in a city with a severe housing crisis. Karen says that many of us had been on that housing database for most of our lives, referring to the 600,000 strong waiting list for housing. We live in a very unequal city. Cape Town is one of the most spatially unequal cities in the world. Many workers spend more than half of their wages to travel to work because of where they are living. Karen moved into Sissie Gool House, an occupied hospital, in 2018, having also been served with an eviction notice in her previous home. Named after an anti-apartheid activist and the first Indian South African woman to be elected as a city councillor, Sissie Gool House is home to over 1,000 people and 350 households. Many are led by women and single mothers, which is reflected in the broader movement and leadership of the Reclaim the City movement. Women have always been a part of and have always been leading the struggle for dignity in South Africa, says Karen. With Reclaim the City, it is women who stepped up, who put their bodies on the line to occupy this building. In 2024, Cape Town Mayor Gordon Hill-Lewis criticized the occupation, claiming that the hospital would have long been released for affordable housing were it not for the building hijacking. At the time of his comments, 30 years after the end of apartheid, not a single affordable housing unit had been completed in the inner city. Karen told me that this line of attack from the mayor is something their movement faces regularly. There are some people who are told by the government that they deserve housing, and then there are those who go and occupy buildings like we did and campaign and protest for land and housing, who are seen to be the non-deserving, illegal land grabbers, she says. We see ourselves as the solution and not the problem, because we have provided an alternative and a solution to the housing crisis that exists in our city by coming to occupy these underutilized buildings. The Sissi Goal House occupation has 5 sections, and each is named after the neighbourhood its residents were evicted from. So, if you were my neighbour at Albert Road in Woodstock, Karen says, then you could still be my neighbour, and we could still build community bonds in the occupation. Internally, Reclaim the City has different segments, dividing up the work of campaigning and the work of maintaining the occupations. Chapter leaders support the campaign work, organizing internally and externally with different social and community movements fighting for land and housing. To come together across different campaigns, Karen explains, has never been an easy thing. But organizers try our best to support one another because most of our challenges that we face are actually the same challenges. Reclaim the City members also look to other parts of the world to inform their own struggle. For instance, describing their connections to a similar occupation in Brazil, Karen told me, "We believe that our struggle and the learning and education in our struggle is each one teach one. So, because of our similar struggles globally, particularly in the global south, we do get together and we do speak about our experiences and we learn from one another." Karen stresses that the political work of Reclaim the City is integral to the movement. The occupations provide homes and community to thousands, but they are not just a community, but an organized community. The movement refutes the idea that working-class communities need help or charity. At the time of writing, one of the occupations is looking into taking legal ownership of the building they live in. Residents do all the work of maintaining the premises, so they want total control and no more threats of eviction from the City Council. Reclaim the City fight for themselves on their own terms, within their own space. In living and sharing space together, the movement is built by people fighting for their demands, but also for each other. How the group's members work together at the everyday level is directly connected to the strength of their movement. They can see their wins and challenges in the space around them. The tools to build better. Across the left, in Glasgow, Britain, and internationally, there are examples of how we can build and expand our movements. The work of this begins at the everyday level, strengthening the trust and relationships between different groups. When the women running Glasgow's Lesbian Line negotiated the use of the Women's Centre with the women involved in the Scottish abortion campaign, it built trust between people involved across both campaigns. The opportunity to share space and resources allowed that negotiation to happen. We must think about where we can replicate that now. In Britain, the sharp rise of the far right has made this task urgent. It must be fought by a coalition of different groups that are united in a broad vision for change, but that celebrate difference and practice solidarity. We will not win by capitulating to any demand, campaign, or party that dampens the diversity of our communities, or worse, seeks to destroy it. If we are not able to come together in women's centres, gay centres, unemployed workers' centres, it is imperative that we find new avenues through which to build and reinforce relationships and trust. This must also be rooted in a politics of community, like that of Reclaim the City, so that the vision and politics we practice make a positive difference to people's lives today. We must come together collectively, directly confronting the challenges that face us, resisting evictions, policing, deportations, and the other mechanisms through which the state and capital seek to enact violence onto our communities. Simultaneously, we can also provide for one another, sharing resources and knowledge to build new iterations of the spaces we once had. The hope of the Corbyn era ended in defeat in 2019, undoubtedly looming large in the left's recent history. But there are lessons to be learnt, both from past and present. If we want to transform the landscape of left-wing organising, we need to reclaim the space we once had. A permanent presence invested in our communities should be a part of the vision. To walk around any neighbourhood in Glasgow or beyond, where new left-wing spaces might once again punctuate our streets, is a vision of hope. To imagine a reconnected left across bookshops, women's centres, unemployed worker centres, and more. To have those spaces rooted in vibrant discussion and solidarity, with strong community foundations, reinforced by mutual trust and respect. We can collectively build new infrastructures of solidarity, ones that are worth fighting for.